The next topic is the social model of disability. But before we tackle about the social model of disability, let me show you a short animation video about it.
According to the medical model of disability, the word disabled means less able. Less able to achieve your potential, less able to have meaningful relationships, less able to play an active part in the world around you, and that this is just your bad luck. This outdated view of the world puts the responsibility of overcoming disabling barriers on the person with an impairment. But this idea is changing. The more modern social model of disability says that a person doesn't have a disability, but that they are disabled. They are disabled by society. It is the attitudes and physical barriers imposed on them by society that prevents them from achieving their potential. The social model was developed by disabled people and their allies to help them take action against discrimination and to empower people to find solutions, remove barriers, and campaign together for equality and human rights. They showed how people with lots of different impairments face many of the same problems. These disabling barriers include prejudiced opinions and attitudes, restricted access, and people being systematically excluded. The social model looks for the ways that society can be planned and organised in order to provide accessibility, independence, and opportunity in a way that enables people rather than disables them. What we learn from the social model of disability is that disability is a social construct created by social barriers which can be eliminated. We learn that it is the responsibility of government, public spaces, businesses, and individual people to make the changes, to increase the access, and build a more equal society where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
What is the definition of social model of disability? The social model of disability is developed over the last 40 years by disabled people. It states that people have impairments, but the oppression, exclusion, and discrimination people with impairments face is not an inevitable consequences of having an impairment, but it caused instead by the way society is run and organized. The social model of disability holds that people with impairments are disabled. They are disabled by the barriers operating in the society that exclude and discriminate against them. This is the social model of disability chart. The social model of disability not only identifies society as the cause of disability, but equally. Importantly, it provides a way of explaining how society goes about disabling people with impairments, sometimes referred to as a barrier approach. The social model provides a route map that identifies both the barriers that disable people with impairments and how these barriers can be removed, minimized, or encountered by other forms of support. Disability is associated with disabling barriers and attitudes, and the focus is redirected to the physical, social, and economic disabling barriers experienced by disabled people, and the impact of anti-discrimination policies. Further, the experience of disability does not exist solely at an individual psychological level or even in interpersonal relations, but encompasses a diverse range of social material factors and circumstances, including family and income. However, according to Barnes and Mercer 2006, the social model of disability does not deny the significance of impairment in people's lives or the relevance of medical treatments to the experience of impairment. Instead, it highlights the difference by advocates of individual model to existence or influence of disabling social and environmental barriers. The World Health Organization 1998 differentiates between disability and impairment. Impairment is seen as any loss or abnormality of psychological and anatomical structures or functions, while disability is referred to any restriction or lack resulting from impairment of ability to perform an activity in the manner or within the range considered normal for a human being. Oliver and Barnes 1998 questioned the role of professionals in the lives of disabled people and emphasizes the imperative need of disabled people to become their own experts. It broadly accepted the ICDH definition of impairment and disability. According to Oliver and Barnes 1998, that impairment is lacking part or all of the limbs or having a defective limbs or organ or mechanism of the body, while disability is the disadvantage or restriction of activity by contemporary social organization that takes no or little account of people who have physical impairments and thus excludes them from participation in the mainstream of social activities. According to Barnes et al. 2010, subsequent discussion with other organizations of disabled people have broadened this terminology and its reference to physical impairments. Now, any impairments can be embraced in the scope of disability, including those that are sensory or intellectual. Most people seem so confused about these two terms, most of the time equating them to each other. The social model of disability, however, reiterates that impairment should be seen as normal aspects of life and when it happens, it should not cause a stir. Instead, society must plan an anticipation of people with impairment occurrences so as not to disable anyone. Kaplan 2000 agrees that if disability were to be seen as something natural or expected, it could change the way we design our system and our environment. It is according to Oliver 1996, the social model of disability became the central concept around which disabled people began to interpret their own experience and organize their own political movement. Oliver and Barnes 2012 cited that it shifted attention to disabled people common experience of oppression and exclusion and those areas that might be changed by collective political action and social change. Wendell 1996, as cited in Kaplan 2000, page 356, relates that the cultural habit of regarding the condition of person, not the built environment, or the social organization of activities as the source of problem runs deep. There are barriers that needs to remove in the society. This study is according to Michael Oliver, February 3, 1945 to March 3, 2019. And there are 4 barriers, and these are the attitudinal barriers, environmental barriers, institutional barriers, and communication barriers. The first barrier is the attitudinal barriers. These are created by people who only see disability when associating with people with disability in some way. These attitudinal barriers can be witnessed through bullying, discrimination, and fear. This barrier includes low expectation of people with disabilities, and these barriers contribute to all other barriers. For example, Assumption that people with certain impairments can't work, shouldn't have children, need protection, are childlike, are dangerous, and they should not sin because they are upsetting. The second one is the environmental barriers. It is inaccessible environment, natural or built, create disability by creating barriers to inclusion. It covers a huge range of barriers that prevents equal access, such as stairs or steps, narrow corridors or doorways, inaccessible toilets, poor lighting, and poorly managed street and public spaces. These are the example of physical barriers or the environmental barriers. First is the sidewalks or doorways that are too narrow for wheelchair, scooter, or walker user. Desks that are too high for a person who is using a wheelchair or other mobility device. Poor lighting that makes it difficult to see for a person with low vision or a person who lip reads, and doorknobs that are difficult to grasp for a person with arthritis. The third barrier is the institutional barriers. This includes many laws, policies, practices, or strategies that are discriminate against people with disability. Example of organizational or systematic barriers includes denying reasonable adjustments to qualified individuals with disability so they can perform the essential functions of the job for which they have applied or have been hired to perform. Second example is the public transport being inaccessible to people with disability, which act as a barrier in their day-to-day lives and reduces the ability of people with disabilities to participate fully in the community life. The last barrier is the communication barriers. Communication barriers are experienced by people who have disability that affect hearing, speaking, reading, writing, or understanding, and who use different ways to communicate than people who do not have disability. Example of communication barriers includes written health message may be inaccessible to people who are blind or vision impaired from receiving the message because of small print or no large print version of material, and no braille or electronic for people who screen readers. Another is the auditory health message may be inaccessible to people who are deaf or have hearing loss from receiving the message, like videos do not include captioning. Another example of communication barriers is complicated health messages may be inaccessible to people with a cognitive disability from receiving the message because the use of technical language, long sentences, and words with many syllables which are not provided in plain language or easy English. So these are the 4 barriers that needs to remove in the society. According to Vassey 1992, the social model of disability is not about showing every dysfunctions in our body can be compensated by a gadgets or good design. It's a way of demonstrating that everyone, even someone who has no movement, no sensory functions, and who is going to die tomorrow, has the right to a certain standards of living and to be treated with respect.